I was making dinner when I found the photographs. Not the ones you think. Not pictures of them together in intimate moments. No, these photos would destroy my life in a completely different way. A way I could never have imagined. And as I stood in my kitchen, trembling, holding those images in my shaking hands, I realized that the affair I thought I'd caught was just the tip of an iceberg made of lies, betrayal, and crimes that went far deeper than infidelity. My name is Victoria Matthews. I'm 47 years old, and for the last 22 years I believed I knew my husband. I believed I understood the man I'd married, the father of my children, the person I'd built a life with. But that night, in my warm kitchen with the aroma of rosemary chicken filling the air, I discovered I had been married to a complete stranger. If you're watching this on Tin Tea Tales, please like and subscribe to my channel right now. Trust me, you won't want to miss the rest of this story. And please tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story travels. It all started exactly 4 months ago. The moment I first noticed something was wrong, something felt off in the comfortable rhythm of my marriage. We had the perfect life, or at least that's what everyone believed. David Matthews, successful investment banker. Victoria Matthews, retired interior designer turned philanthropist. 2 adult children in college, a beautiful home in the prestigious Westbrook neighborhood, vacations to Europe, charity galas, and all the trappings of what people consider success. But success, I've learned, is just a beautiful mask, and some masks hide the darkest secrets. I remember the day our new nanny started. Her name was Sophie Hartley. She was 24, fresh out of culinary school, and came highly recommended by a colleague of David's. I should have questioned that immediately. Why would my husband know about nanny candidates? Why was he so insistent about hiring her specifically? But I didn't question it. I was busy with my foundation work. Our youngest, Emma, was still in high school, and with my increasingly demanding schedule managing the Matthews Family Foundation, I thought hiring live-in help was a practical solution. Sophie was beautiful. I'll admit that. Not in a threatening way at first. She had long auburn hair, pale skin, and a delicate, almost fragile appearance that made you want to protect her. She spoke softly, always with impeccable manners, and seemed genuinely interested in helping our family. She cooked, cleaned, helped Emma with schoolwork, and managed the household with an efficiency that was frankly impressive for someone so young. It took me 3 weeks to notice that David came home earlier on the days Sophie worked. 3 weeks. That's how long it took me to register that pattern. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, Sophie's days off, David would stay at the office later or go to his club. But on the days she was here, Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and weekends, he would arrive home with flowers, cologne, and a nervous energy that I'd learned to recognize as anticipation. I told myself I was being paranoid. David had always been affectionate. Or maybe he was just happy that our home was being run more smoothly. Or perhaps the nervous energy was just stress from work. I created 100 explanations for what my gut was screaming at me, but I started paying attention. I noticed how he would find excuses to be in the kitchen when she was cooking. How he would laugh at her jokes a little too loudly. How his eyes would follow her when she walked through the house. I noticed how she always seemed to position herself near him during conversations, and how her hand would brush against his shoulder when she passed. Then came the late meetings. "Honey, I have to head to a dinner meeting in the city," he would say. "Some Asian investors are in town. It might run late." Or, "The quarterly review is happening tomorrow. I'll probably need to work through the night at the office." Or, "My friend James is going through a divorce. I'm going to grab drinks with him to support him." Each excuse came with that same nervous energy, that same cologne, that same anticipation in his eyes. And each time, I noticed that Sophie seemed to know exactly what he would say. She would disappear into her room just before he left. She would change into nicer clothes. Her makeup would be freshly applied. I became obsessed. I hate myself for it. But I became the woman I'd always despised. The suspicious wife, checking bank statements, monitoring phone usage, listening to conversations in hallways. I felt like I was going mad, but I couldn't stop. One evening, I pretended to leave for a dinner event with my foundation committee. I'd actually canceled that morning, but I didn't tell David. I drove around the block, parked my car in a neighbor's driveway, and crept back to the house. I felt ridiculous, like I was in some trashy television drama. But I needed to know. I needed to see it with my own eyes. The back door was unlocked. I let myself in quietly and climbed the stairs. Their voices were coming from the guest cottage. We had a separate guest cottage in our backyard that we rarely used. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. Through the window, I could see them. They were kissing, her hands in his hair, his hands on her waist. And the betrayal was so visceral, so physical, that I actually thought I might vomit. 18 months of suspicion crystallized into one irrefutable moment of certainty. I didn't confront them that night. I couldn't. I was too shocked, too humiliated, too devastated. I drove around for 3 hours in the dark, tears streaming down my face, trying to understand how my life could change so completely in a matter of minutes. I had always imagined that if I discovered David's infidelity, I would be angry. I thought I would rage and scream and throw things. But I wasn't angry. I was hollow. I was empty. I was a woman watching her entire life collapse from the outside, unable to stop it, unable to do anything but witness the destruction. The next morning, I woke up with a decision. I was going to leave him. That was clear. But before I did, I needed ammunition. I needed evidence. Not just for legal reasons, though God knows I would need that, but for emotional reasons. I needed proof that I wasn't crazy, that my suspicions were valid, that this was really happening. I became someone I didn't recognize. I borrowed a friend's iPad and set up a hidden camera in the guest cottage. I installed tracking software on David's phone. I photographed every text message, every email, every receipt. I became an amateur detective in my own marriage, gathering evidence like clues at a crime scene. It took me 2 weeks to gather what I needed. 2 weeks of watching them through that hidden camera. 2 weeks of seeing my husband with another woman. 2 weeks of collecting proof of his betrayal. It was the longest 2 weeks of my life. But then, on a Tuesday evening, Sophie had the night off. David left the house around 8, saying he was meeting with a client. After he left, I did something I'd never done before. I went into his office and opened the safe. I knew the combination. He'd told me years ago for emergencies. Inside were documents, files, and photographs. That's when I found them. Not photos of him and Sophie. Nothing like that. These photographs were different. These photographs were somehow worse. They showed girls, young girls, some who looked like they were barely 16 or 17. They showed what looked like a warehouse space. They showed documents in Sophie's handwriting. They showed payment records. They showed addresses. And in the background of several photos, I could see David's face. My knees literally buckled. I grabbed onto his desk to keep from falling. The room began to spin, and I felt like I was suffocating. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. Not David. Not my David. The man I'd spent 22 years with. The father of my children. The man who volunteered at youth centers and donated to children's charities. I photographed everything. Every single page. Every picture. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone steady. But I did it. I had to have evidence. I had to understand what I was looking at. Then I heard the front door open. He wasn't supposed to be home for at least 2 hours. But there he was, calling out, "Victoria? Honey, are you home?" I shoved everything back into the safe with fumbling fingers, my heart pounding like a wild animal trying to escape my chest. I closed the office door behind me just as David appeared at the end of the hallway. "There you are," he said, smiling that familiar smile that I'd always found so comforting, so trustworthy. I was able to get out of the meeting early. I thought we could spend some time together. Maybe we could get takeout from that Italian place you love. I stared at him, at this man, at the stranger wearing my husband's face, and I felt a crushing weight settle in my chest. The weight of knowing something that would destroy everything. "I'm not feeling well," I managed to say. "I think I'm going to lie down." "Oh no," he said, coming toward me. "Do you have a fever? Should I call the doctor?" "No," I said, stepping away from him. "Just a migraine. I need to rest." He looked disappointed, but he accepted it. He was always accepting of my migraines, I realize now. Because when I had a migraine, I would retreat to my room. I would close the curtains. I would be unavailable. I would be unable to monitor his movements. How convenient for him. I locked myself in our bedroom and called my best friend, Diane. She was the only person I could trust. The only person I knew wouldn't judge me. wouldn't betray me. Diane, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I need to see you. Right now, in person. And I need your lawyer's phone number. Diane has been my friend since college. She has always been my voice of reason, my shoulder to cry on, my steady presence in a chaotic world. Within an hour, she was at my door. I showed her the photographs I'd taken of David's hidden documents. Her face went white as she looked at them. Then she put her hand to her mouth and said, Victoria, we need to call the police. Now. Not yet, I said. I need to know what I'm looking at first. I need to understand. With Diane's help, and with the assistance of her brother who works in law enforcement, I began to piece together the horrifying truth about my husband, David. It seemed, wasn't just having an affair with Sophie. He was involved in human trafficking. Sophie was working with him. They were recruiting vulnerable young girls, girls from difficult home situations, girls in the foster system, girls who had run away, and transporting them across state lines. The warehouse photos showed what appeared to be living quarters where these girls were being held. The payment records showed that David was being paid significant sums of money. This wasn't a side business venture he'd gotten tangled up in. This was systematic. This was organized. This was something he'd clearly been doing for years. I found evidence that he'd been grooming Sophie for months before we hired her as a nanny. He'd met her at a networking event, except she wasn't a real nanny. She was a recruiter. She was part of his operation. Bringing her into our home hadn't been about getting help with Emma. It had been about getting her in close to me, into my life, so she could monitor my movements and keep David informed about when I would be home or away. My own stepdaughter, Emma, the child I raised from age 5 when David married me, had been completely fooled. She adored Sophie. She spent hours talking to her, confiding in her, and the whole time, Sophie was an enemy in our home, a wolf in sheep's clothing, a stranger strategically placed in our lives. All the pieces began to fit together. The sudden wealth, the new cars and renovations, the trips. David had always explained them away as successful investments and business deals, but now I knew the truth. Blood money, that's what had paid for our beautiful life. I was living in a house built on the suffering of children. I was wearing diamonds paid for with their pain. I was sleeping beside a monster. I spent an entire week gathering more evidence. Diane's brother connected me with the FBI. I gave them access to my copies of David's files. I told them everything I knew. They told me to keep acting normal, to pretend I didn't know anything, to help them build a case. So I did. I became an actress. I cooked dinner and smiled at the dinner table. I listened to David talk about his day. I shared a bed with a man I now knew was evil. I looked into his eyes across breakfast and didn't scratch them out. But the whole time, agents were investigating. The whole time, they were building their case. The whole time, I was waiting for the moment when my life would explode. It came on a Wednesday morning. David had gone to the office. Emma had gone to school. And Sophie was in the guest cottage. FBI agents arrived at my door with a warrant. They executed a search of the house, the guest cottage, David's office. They found the safe. They found additional documents. They found computers with encrypted files that would later be used as evidence. Then they told me David had been arrested at his office. The news broke later that day. Prominent investment banker arrested in human trafficking ring. The headlines were everywhere. Text messages started pouring in from friends, from family, from colleagues asking if it was true, if I knew anything, how I was holding up. The humiliation was almost as devastating as the betrayal. Emma called me from school, hysterical. Mom, what's happening? I saw something online about Dad. Is it true? What is it? Please tell me what's going on. I had to tell my 18-year-old daughter that her father was a human trafficker. I had to explain that her beloved nanny was an accomplice. I had to destroy her world just as mine had been destroyed. Sophie disappeared. She fled before they could arrest her, and the FBI later found her in 3 states away attempting to cross into Canada. She was arrested at the border. But David's arrest didn't bring me peace. It brought chaos. It brought lawyers and court dates and civil suits. It brought journalists calling my phone. It brought the realization that I was now the wife of a convicted human trafficker, and that label would follow me for the rest of my life. If you're still watching, I want to thank you. This story is difficult for me to tell, and I know it's difficult to hear, But I need you to understand that these stories matter. These stories of betrayal, transformation, and survival, they matter because they're real. They're happening to real people right now. If you're watching on Tinty Tales, please support us by sending a super thanks. Your support allows us to continue bringing these important stories to life. And please share this video. Send it to someone you know. You might not realize how much they need to hear this story right now. The secret to survival isn't pretending everything is fine. The secret to survival is telling the truth, no matter how painful that truth might be. The secret to survival is letting people help you carry the weight. I couldn't have survived the next year without Diane, without her brother, without the FBI agents who believed me, without my therapist, without my faith. Please, if you're watching this and you're hiding something, if you're protecting someone who shouldn't be protected, if you're staying silent about abuse or exploitation, please reach out for help. The resources are there. You are not alone. Now let's continue. The next 18 months were a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. There were court appearances, legal depositions, testimony. I had to sit in a courtroom and listen to the details of what my husband had done. I had to hear about the girls he'd exploited. I had to listen to their victim impact statements, and each one broke a piece of my heart that I thought was already completely shattered. David pleaded guilty to multiple counts. 23 counts of human trafficking, money laundering, conspiracy, and wire fraud. The sentencing hearing was the worst day of my life. Worse than the day I found the photographs. Worse than the day he was arrested, I testified. I told the judge about the life we'd built on lies. I talked about coming home to a man who hugged me and said he loved me, not knowing that those same hands had been involved in destroying the lives of vulnerable children. I talked about the time I'd wasted, the years I'd lost, the future I'd imagined that would never happen, because it was never real to begin with. The prosecutor asked me what I wanted the court to understand about his crimes. I remember standing up in that courtroom, looking directly at David and saying, "Your Honor, I want the court to understand that this man stole from me. He stole my time, my trust, my faith, and my own judgment. But more importantly, he stole from children. He took their futures, their innocence, their safety. And no sentence, no matter how long, will ever balance the scales of what he's done." David was sentenced to 45 years in federal prison. He would spend the rest of his natural life behind bars, and while that should have brought me closure, it didn't. Because I still had to live in the world as the wife of a human trafficker. I still had to rebuild my entire life from the ashes. The financial consequences were devastating. The house was seized as an asset purchased with proceeds from crime. Our bank accounts were frozen. Civil suits were filed by the victims and their families. David's assets, at least the ones that could be traced, were liquidated to create a restitution fund for his victims. I had to start over. At 47 years old, I had to start over. I won't lie to you. The first months after his arrest, I wanted to die. I would wake up in the morning, and for a few blessed seconds, I wouldn't remember. And then it would crash back over me, and I would wonder why I even bothered getting out of bed. I moved in with Diane. I couldn't stay in Westbrook. The looks from neighbors, the gossip, the reporters on my lawn, it was too much. I needed to disappear. Emma struggled in ways that broke my heart. She had trusted Sophie. She had loved David. She felt betrayed, and she also felt ashamed. The girls at her school knew who her father was. She became the human trafficker's daughter. She dropped out of college for a semester. She went to therapy. She cut off most of her friendships. For a year, we barely spoke, and when we did, it was tense and careful. I had failed to protect her. That's how she felt. That's how I felt, too. I had failed to see the monster in my home. I had failed to protect not just Emma, but all those girls. If I'd been paying better attention, if I'd asked more questions, if I'd trusted my gut sooner, maybe things would have been different. My therapist, and I want to emphasize that therapy saved my life, kept telling me that I was a victim too. "You didn't know," she would say. "You were manipulated. You were betrayed. Your trauma is valid. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to be a victim. I wanted to be strong. I wanted to be the woman who survived this, not the woman destroyed by it." It took me 8 months of therapy before I could understand that those two things weren't mutually exclusive. I could be both a victim and a survivor. I could acknowledge my pain and still move forward. I could be broken and still be healing. The turning point came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I was volunteering at a women's shelter. I had started volunteering 3 months after David's arrest because I needed to do something, anything to help. I was sitting with a woman named Sarah who had just escaped domestic violence. She was terrified and alone, and I was helping her fill out applications for emergency housing. "How did you get through it?" she asked me. "How did you survive?" And I realized, in that moment, that I had survived. I was sitting there, breathing, helping another person, moving forward. I wasn't the same person I'd been, and I never would be again. But I was here. I was alive. I was trying. One day at a time, I told her. One moment at a time. And with help from people who love you, and by helping other people, by turning your pain into purpose. She cried, and I held her hand. And in that moment, I made a decision. My life wasn't over. It was just beginning again, and I was going to make sure my suffering meant something. I had to step back from the Matthews Family Foundation for a while. The board voted, thankfully, to separate my name from David's by changing the foundation's name to the Victoria Matthews Foundation for Vulnerable Youth. They kept me on as director, and slowly, I transformed what had been a general charity into something very specific. I dedicated the foundation to helping survivors of human trafficking. We started a safe house. We provided legal assistance, mental health support, job training, and education. We worked with local law enforcement and the FBI. We raised awareness about trafficking and its signs. Within 2 years, the Victoria Matthews Foundation had helped over 200 trafficking survivors rebuild their lives. My father called me 3 months into this work. We hadn't spoken since David's arrest. My parents had struggled with shame and humiliation alongside me. But when my father finally called, he said something I needed to hear. "I'm proud of you," he said. "I'm proud of the woman you've become. I'm sorry it took this tragedy for me to see what I should have always known. That you're the strongest person I know," I cried. I had been waiting 18 months to hear someone say they were proud of me, that I hadn't failed, that I was doing the right thing. Emma came home from college her sophomore year. She had transferred to a school closer to where I was living. She had decided to major in criminal justice with a focus on victim advocacy. She wanted to work in human trafficking prevention and prosecution. "I know it sounds like I'm doing this because of Dad," she said to me one evening, "and maybe part of me is. But mostly, I'm doing this because I want to help. I want to make sure what happened to those girls never happens to anyone else." I looked at my daughter, this intelligent, brave, beautiful young woman, and I realized that something good could come from the ashes. Not enough to justify what happened. Never that, but something. We became a team. Emma worked with the foundation part-time while studying. We attended trials together. We advocated for stronger sentencing guidelines. We spoke at conferences about recognizing the signs of trafficking. We gave workshops to social workers and teachers. This became my purpose. This became my reason for getting out of bed in the morning. 3 years after David's arrest, I received a letter in the mail. It was from him. I almost threw it away without reading it. The thought of hearing from him, of reading his words, made my stomach turn. But something made me open it. "Dear Victoria," it began, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I understand if you throw this away without reading further. But I need you to know something. I need you to hear it, even if you never respond. What I did was unforgivable. What I did destroyed lives, the lives of those girls, your life, Emma's life, our marriage. I destroyed you, and there isn't a day in this prison cell where I don't feel the weight of that destruction. I won't make excuses. I won't say I was struggling or that I was confused or that circumstances led me to make bad choices. Those are lies people tell themselves. The truth is that I made deliberate choices. Every single day I woke up and made the choice to participate in evil, and now I'm here. And you're out there building a life. Helping people, turning your pain into purpose. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I wanted you to know that I see what you've built. I've read about your foundation. I've heard about the lives you've changed, and at least there's that. At least some good has come from this nightmare. I'm taking responsibility for my actions. I've confessed to additional crimes in exchange for cooperation with ongoing investigations. I've given testimony that has led to the prosecution of other people involved in trafficking networks. It's not redemption. I'm not naive enough to think I can be redeemed, but it's something. You were the best thing in my life, and I destroyed it. That's my eternal punishment. David, I read that letter multiple times. I cried reading it. Not because I forgave him. Forgiveness seemed like too much to ask. But because I finally had closure. I finally understood that what had happened wasn't something I could have prevented. I finally accepted that his choices were his own. I wrote him back. I didn't send the letter. My therapist advised against it, but I wrote it for myself. Dear David, I'm not writing this for you. I'm writing this for me. You destroyed something precious. You destroyed the life I thought we were building. You destroyed my faith in my own judgment and my own instincts. But you didn't destroy me, and that's what matters. I've spent 3 years rebuilding. I've spent 3 years turning my rage and my pain and my humiliation into work that helps other people. I've spent 3 years learning that I'm stronger than you ever were. I'm stronger because I faced what happened, and I moved forward. You're in a prison cell, and you'll die in that prison cell. I forgive you, not for your sake, but for mine. I forgive you so that I can finally be free. I forgive you so that your actions don't control my emotions anymore. I forgive you so I can move forward without carrying the weight of your betrayal. And I hope you spend every single day in that cell thinking about what you could have had if you'd just been a decent human being. I hope you spend every single day knowing that the woman you betrayed is out here doing good work, helping people you tried to hurt, building a legacy that will outlast you. Victoria. I burned that letter in my fireplace and watched the ashes float up the chimney. And in that moment, I finally felt free. 5 years after David's arrest, I'm a different person than I was before I found those photographs. I'm harder in some ways. I'm more skeptical. I don't trust as easily, but I'm also wiser. I'm also stronger. I'm also more compassionate. The Victoria Matthews Foundation has expanded. We have satellite offices in 4 states. We've helped over 1,000 survivors. We've worked with law enforcement to prosecute 47 additional traffickers. We've trained over 500 professionals in identifying and responding to trafficking. Emma graduated from college with honors and is now working for the FBI as a victim specialist. She helps survivors navigate the legal system and access resources. She's brilliant at it. She's found her calling. I've maintained a strict no-contact policy with David. I don't visit him. I don't write to him. I don't want to know about his life in prison. As far as I'm concerned, he's a ghost. He exists in my past, not in my present or future. I did something I never thought I would do. I went on a date. His name is Michael. He's a trauma psychologist who volunteers with the foundation. We met at a training session. He knew everything about my past before he asked me out. He didn't make me feel like a victim. He treated me like a woman who had survived something terrible and come out the other side. On our 3rd date, he asked me how I had been able to forgive David. I haven't forgiven him, I told him. Not really, but I've forgiven myself. I've forgiven myself for not seeing what he was. I've forgiven myself for staying. I've forgiven myself for all the ways I failed to protect others. And in forgiving myself, I've found that I can live with what happened. I can accept it as part of my story without letting it define me. Michael listened carefully to everything I said. And then he said, "You're one of the strongest people I know." I believed him. Finally, after 5 years, I believed that I was strong. A week ago, I received word that David had died in prison. A heart attack, they said. He was 60 years old. He'd spent 15 of those years in federal prison serving his sentence. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel justice. I didn't feel much of anything, except maybe a strange sense of finality. It was over. The man I'd been married to was gone. The threat he represented was finished. Emma and I sat together when I told her. She cried, not because she loved him, but because it meant that this chapter of her life was truly closed now. He would no longer exist in a prison somewhere. He would be a memory, and eventually, even that memory would fade. "Do you think he suffered?" Emma asked me. "I don't know," I said honestly, "and I'm not sure it matters anymore. What matters is that he can't hurt anyone else." I made a decision that day. I started giving talks. I started telling my story publicly. I started doing interviews and writing about my experience, not to get revenge or to humiliate, but to help other people, to help wives who are suspicious but afraid, to help people who might be living with someone engaged in criminal activity, to help potential trafficking victims recognize the signs. And something extraordinary happened. Other people started sharing their stories with me. Women who had discovered their husbands were embezzling money. Women who had discovered their partners were abusing children. Women who had discovered devastating secrets that changed everything. I realized that my story wasn't unique. The specifics were unique, but the core of it, the shock of discovering that the person you loved wasn't who you thought they were, that was universal. The hardest part of my recovery wasn't the legal system or the financial consequences or even the public humiliation. The hardest part was learning to trust again. Trust in myself. Trust in my judgment. Trust in the world. And I don't know if I'll ever fully get there, but I'm trying. Every day I'm trying. The Victoria Matthews Foundation received a national award for its work in human trafficking prevention. When I accepted that award, I thought about the girls whose lives were changed because of the work we do. I thought about the families reunited, the survivors given second chances, the traffickers prosecuted and imprisoned. I also thought about David, about the version of him I had created in my mind that didn't exist in reality, and I felt no anger, no regret, no wish to change anything, because everything that happened led me here. Everything that happened led me to this purpose, this work, this life. Michael proposed to me 6 months ago. Not because he wanted to fix me. I'm not broken enough to need fixing. But because he loves the woman I've become, the woman I chose to become out of the ashes of my former life. Emma will be a bridesmaid. My father will walk me down the aisle. My best friend Diane will sing. And for the first time since I was a young woman, I will walk toward my future without fear, without doubt, without the weight of someone else's lies crushing me down. I want to share what I've learned from all of this, because I know someone watching needs to hear it. First, trust your instincts. I ignored mine for months because I didn't want to believe what my gut was telling me. I made excuses. I rationalized. I pretended. And that delay cost vulnerable young people their freedom and safety. Listen to your instincts. They're smarter than you think. Second, it's not your fault. If you're in a situation where you've been deceived, where you've been manipulated, where you've been lied to, it's not your fault. You couldn't have known. You couldn't have predicted. You did the best you could with the information you had. Give yourself grace. Third, leaving is an act of love. I had to leave David. I had to choose myself, and some people saw that as selfish. But staying would have been selfish. Selfish to myself, selfish to Emma, selfish to the victims of his crimes who needed someone to take action. Choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. Fourth, healing isn't linear. I don't wake up every morning healed and whole. Some days I still feel the phantom pain of betrayal. Some days I still feel angry. Some days I still feel afraid. But I also wake up with purpose. I wake up knowing that I'm building something good. I wake up grateful to be alive. Fifth, vulnerability is strength. I've built my career on being vulnerable, on telling my story, on admitting my weaknesses and my fears. And I've discovered that vulnerability doesn't make me weaker. It makes me stronger. It connects me to other people. It allows me to help others. It reminds me that I'm human, that I'm real, that my pain matters. And finally, trauma doesn't define you unless you let it. I could have spent my life as the woman whose husband was a human trafficker. But instead, I chose to become the woman who built a foundation to help trafficking survivors. I could have stayed a victim, but I chose to be a survivor. I chose to be a warrior. I chose to be a woman who makes the world a little bit better. If you're watching this story on Tin Tea Tales and you've made it this far, I want to personally thank you. I know this story was long. I know it was intense. I know it might have triggered your own painful memories or fears. But I also know that someone watching needed to hear this. Someone watching is in a situation where something feels wrong, and they needed to know they're not crazy. Someone watching is recovering from a betrayal, and they needed to know they're not alone. Someone watching is thinking about starting over, and they needed to believe that it's possible. Please, if you're reading this and something in your life feels wrong, trust that feeling. Reach out to someone you trust. Call the National Human Trafficking Hotline at 1-888-373-7888. Call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. There are people trained to help you. You are not alone. If you've liked this story, please like and subscribe to Tin Tea Tales. We tell stories of betrayal, survival, and hope. We tell stories of real people facing impossible circumstances and finding their way through to the other side. We tell stories that matter. Please subscribe so that you never miss a story. Please comment and tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if my story resonated with you. Tell me if you have your own story of survival. Let's build a community of people who believe in the power of telling the truth. And if you want to support us directly, please send a super thanks. Your support allows us to continue bringing these important stories to the world. Your support helps us reach more people with messages of hope and healing. For more information about human trafficking and resources for survivors, please check the links in the description. For information about the Victoria Matthews Foundation, visit our website. There's more to see and more to do in our fight against trafficking. I'm so grateful you watched this story. I'm so grateful you listened. I'm so grateful you cared enough to stay for the entire journey. My name is Victoria Matthews. I'm now 52 years old. I've survived betrayal, humiliation, trauma, and loss. I've rebuilt my life from the ashes of my former existence. I've found love, purpose, and peace. And every single day, I wake up grateful. Grateful that I'm alive. Grateful that I've found meaning in my suffering. Grateful that I can help others walk the path I've walked. The world tried to define me by my husband's crimes. My community tried to shame me. My own mind tried to convince me that I was weak and foolish, but I refused those definitions. I chose my own story. I chose my own identity. I chose my own future. You can too. Whatever you're facing right now, whatever secret you're carrying, whatever betrayal you've suffered, you can survive it. You can move past it. You can build something beautiful on the ruins of what was destroyed. It won't be easy. The path of healing is long and difficult and painful, but it's worth it. You're worth it. I'm sending you all of my love, all of my hope, and all of my belief that you can get through this. We'll get through it together. This community, this family of people watching Tinty Tales, we'll get through it together. For now, I'll say goodbye, but I'll be back with more stories. More stories of women who survived impossible odds. More stories of people who chose healing over bitterness. More stories of hope and transformation. With love and respect, this is Victoria Matthews, and this has been my story. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Trust your instincts. Choose yourself. Build a life worth living. Tinty Tales, where real stories change real lives.